Hello and welcome to a video that YouTube will definitely demonetize. Hello and welcome to the first TLDR video ever to trend on Porn. Hello and welcome to another TLDR Explains video. Today we're talking about casual sex. Yeah, a phrase I didn't expect to utter when I started a politics YouTube channel, but here we are. We're not just going to be talking about casual sex for fun though. It's become a serious issue recently, with the government shifting COVID rules and potentially opening the doors to, well, more sexual encounters. So, in this video, we'll discuss what the government has to say about casual sex, what this situation tells us about the government's wider COVID strategy, and I'll show you this excruciating interview where Health Secretary Matt Hancock discusses sex on Breakfast News. Considering this video is genuinely likely to get demonetized and suppressed by the algorithm, we genuinely appreciate your support through Patreon. These backers help us make more content across the TLDR network and support the work we're doing. In return, they get bonus perks like exclusive live events, behind-the-scenes posts, early access to videos, merch discounts, exclusive merch items, and their names mentioned in videos. Find out what you can get over on our Patreon page. It's linked down below. So, before we get to cringy breakfast interviews, let's discuss the serious business of the government's new COVID regulations. The very basic issue here is all about social distancing. Now, I don't have time to go through all of the COVID regulations that have been introduced, but in the broadest possible terms, government advice has been to stay 2 meters away from people and to limit social gatherings to households and bubbles. I know there's been exceptions. I know there was a whole month when everyone was teased out of their house with meal discounts, but the rules have been moderately clear throughout. This broad guidance, limit the people you come into contact with and stay distanced from people when you do meet them, isn't exactly conducive to casual sex. After all, to make that work at a 2 meter distance would require some serious creativity. Beyond that, it seems pretty clear, to me at least, that during a pandemic, pretty much the last thing you want to do is meet up with strangers, let alone transferring bodily fluids with them. Weirdly, using medical terminology there made it grosser somehow. Regardless, hopefully it was broadly understood that casual sex was off the table. If you don't live with them, it's probably worth avoiding. However, this does raise some difficult questions. What about those in established relationships, but don't live with their partners? Well, the rules varied across the UK. Scotland and Wales both allowed established couples to meet and, well, do as they please. England was a little stricter though, only officially changing guidance on Tuesday. According to new government guidance for England, you do not need to social distance from anyone in your household, meaning the people you live with. You also don't need to socially distance from someone you're in an established relationship with, or anyone in your legally permitted support bubble if you're in one. So, if you're no longer socially distancing with your partner, then the whole situation becomes a bit easier, and, well, other options are now back on the cards. However, as The Sun eloquently put it, new rules quietly slipped under the radar, confirming that people don't need to distance from people they've been seeing. But casual bonking is still banned to stop the virus from spreading. Casual bonking. And I thought this video hadn't sunk low enough already. Ultimately though, all of this raised more questions than it answered. For the first time in about 6 months, non-cohabiting couples were allowed to have sex under government rules, but the definition of established couples was far from established itself. No one quite knew how this rule should be applied, which encounters counted as established and which were casual. So when Hancock visited the Sky News studio, Kay Burley took the opportunity to probe him. Maybe that's the wrong word in this context actually.
Look, there are...
It's okay to smile.
In these rules that we have to bring in, you have to have... there have to be boundaries. People need to be sensible, and if you're in a relationship that is well established, you know, that's what it means.
Is that like 6 months?
What it means is people realising that by coming into close contact with people in other households, then that is how the virus spreads.
Ultimately then, it's not a whole lot clearer. More awkward for sure, but not much clearer. And don't worry, I hear the comments already. I get that this doesn't really matter. People can, or should, be trusted to draw the line for themselves and decide if they're safe or not. And even if they can't, the police aren't enforcing mask wearing in supermarkets. They sure as hell aren't going to be enforcing this rule. The thing is that this kind of exemplifies the issues with the government's approach to COVID. And to be fair to them, the difficulties of governing during a crisis like this anyway. That's because while the government have desperately been trying to keep things simple, the rules are getting more and more complicated. For example, under new rules introduced in England on Tuesday, you're allowed to meet 30 people at funerals, 15 at weddings, but wedding receptions and christenings are limited to 6, including the baby. Or what about taxis? Under these new rules, I can hop into an Uber, but I have to wear a mask. But if I had a chauffeur, I wouldn't. Luckily though, AdSense isn't generous enough for me to have to worry about that one. Or what about the fact that in England, pubs have to lock their doors at 10 PM, but in Wales, they only have to start encouraging people to drink up and get out at 10 PM. Or the rule that requires table service in pubs, but allows counter service in places like McDonald's and Pret. Why can't I go up to the bar and order a pint if I'm allowed to go to the counter to order 9 nuggets? Some of these inconsistencies can be pretty easily rationalised. Wedding ceremonies have to be bigger than receptions in order to facilitate various religious traditions, such as the Jewish rule that 10 adult men must be present for the ceremony to be official, which clearly wouldn't be possible with 6 people. The Uber rule also kind of makes sense. The risk of transmission through a shared driver versus a private one is clearly different. And maybe drunk people can be trusted less at a bar than those who are desperate for McFlurries. But the point is that even if these rules logically make sense, it doesn't make them any easier to follow. As we head back into winter and lockdowns will likely become ever more common, complex and inconsistent rules are the last thing the government wants to wrangle with. Given that compliance is already slipping and a good section of the public are clearly unwilling to follow government guidance, the job of enforcing these rules becomes increasingly difficult, something the PM seemed exasperated by in the House of Commons this week.
Does he think that the reason Germany and Italy have far lower COVID rates than us, with life continuing more or less normally, might be because they have locally and publicly run test and trace services that actually work?
No, Mr. Speaker, I don't. And I think the continual attacks on local test and trace and what the NHS test and trace have done are undermining and unnecessary. And actually, there is an important difference between our country and many other countries around the world, and that is our country is a freedom-loving country, Mr. Speaker. And if you look at the history of this country over the last 300 years, virtually every advance from free speech to democracy has come from this country. And it is very difficult to ask the British population uniformly to obey guidelines in the way that it is necessary.
Ultimately, though, it seems that this isn't exactly true. Not only do the Prime Minister's remarks suggest that other nations are less freedom-loving than us, which is, well, let's not go there, it also goes against research and polling, which suggests that Brits are actually more authoritarian than most. In fact, Opinium's head of political polling said that the British public will always choose the more safety-first option. Further than that, a poll by Britain Thinks asked respondents to select ideas which they believed embodied the core British values. At the top of the list came being proud to be British, then respect for the rule of law, and then being polite. However, the ideal that Johnson was alluding to, valuing individual freedoms, actually came 7th, only slightly above the British tradition of having a Sunday roast. Britain Thinks' co-founder commented on Johnson's remarks and their polling, saying the desire to turn this into a jingoistic idea of what it is to be British might be appealing to certain politicians, but it rings quite hollow on the ground. Going on to say, yes, there is increasing frustration with the rules, but that's not about having them, that's about struggling to follow them because they're seen as confusing, inconsistent, and a bit unfair. As Britain heads into a complicated and difficult winter, the government is clearly relying on people to follow the guidance they set out. And despite Johnson's assertions, they may have some success if people feel the rules are simple, consistent and fair. Unfortunately for some though, that still means no casual sex. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release new videos. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. If you want to see your name at the end of the videos, like Anthony Green, Thomas Gray, and Jeremy Frick, then be sure to back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.